Today what we're really going to talk about is how we start to take the right steps to be able to produce and manufacture these next generation of therapeutics, really making sure that we get those therapeutics to the patients when they need it. And first off, my name is Brian Taylor. I am the head of BioPharma Solutions at SmartLabs. I've been working in bioproduction now for over 2 decades. Started my career at Genentech back when we were still doing manufacturing in large stainless steel bioreactors because we only had a couple of monoclonal antibodies we were producing at that time. Fast forward a couple years where we started to see a lot more diversity in the pipelines where we were needing to produce high mix, low volume. I moved over to GE where I was running their global biomanufacturing solutions business, which was turnkey manufacturing operations for biologics built on a single-use platform. I think single-use was kind of that first step into how do we solve the challenge of doing high-mix, low-volume production. And now I've moved over to SmartLabs, where at SmartLabs we're really focused on developing that next generation of infrastructure to support the modern therapeutics. So this both encompasses both R&D as well as production. How do we build infrastructure that is flexible to adapt? So one day maybe you're making an autologous cell therapy, the next day you're moving on and doing some type of gene therapy in the same space, and then you have somebody else that wants to move in and do, let's call it a monoclonal antibody or an ADC. In a matter of weeks, we can turn around that space then to support that. So really about how do we take production capacity, variabilize it in a way that you use it when you need it, and create the flexibility that we need to adapt to the changing landscape, which is even more diverse than it was years ago when we started to move towards single use. So I think we've got a great panel today. We've got Scott Cross from Dark Horse. We've got Tania Perea Chalima from Univercells, and Stephen Ward from Catapult. And so if you guys would join me up here, we'll get started. And I want to give everybody an opportunity to introduce themselves and a little bit about their company before we start into some questions and some discussions. So, Scott, would you like to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Cross. I'm a senior principal at Dark Horse Consulting. My whole career has been spent in the gene therapy field. Started out at Merck & Company, Indiana University with the vector production facility, University of Florida with Florida Biologics, and then Orchard Therapeutics as the vice president of vector operations. Vector side, a little bit of cell therapy, mostly manufacturing.
Good stuff. Tania?
So I'm Tania Perea Chalima. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Univercells Technology. So I'm a biochemical engineer by training. I specialized in cell and gene therapy, so actually designing manufacturing strategies for cell and gene therapy products during my PhD, and then I spent some time working for the Gates Foundation, again on manufacturing strategies, but on the viral vector side. So this was a postdoc with UCL and Gates Foundation before I moved to Univercells as a product manager, and then now as a CTO at Univercells Technology. So we work to develop technologies, as the name of the technology of the company says, but really focusing on technologies to advance manufacture of virus production for both vaccine applications as well as gene vectors.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for hanging around. I'm not used to this. My voice is almost gone after having a day of having partnering meetings. It's fantastically, but exhausting. I'm out of practice, plus I'm getting old. I'm Stephen Ward, Chief Manufacturing Officer of the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult. I'm one of the sort of founding exec directors of the Catapult. I was talking to Eric earlier on. I think I've been in cell gene therapy now for 22 years, which has flown by. It's just such an exciting area. And I've been focusing really on the sort of development and technology and manufacturing bridge, and how do we ensure the role of manufacturing and supply chain and all of its glory is brought to bear on these exciting technologies, because if we don't have that, then it just remains as an interesting piece of science, and that's sort of what I've been doing for the last 20 or so years. I started off actually in the cancer vaccine field, and there's a lot of parallels still keep coming through. We still seem to be falling over some of the same banana skins that we were a while ago, but it's clearly a transformed field from where we were, and it's incredibly privileged, I think, position that we're in to be working in such an exciting area and helping to enable these technologies to get to the patient impacts that we heard about first thing this morning, which is why we do what we do. Thank you.
Fantastic. So maybe to get it started, I think historically when we've thought about how startup companies get moving towards getting into the clinic and making products so that they can get into the clinic, I think traditionally you've kind of had two ways to do that. You either went to a CDMO and had them do that for you, or you had to go out and build your own manufacturing capacity to do that. I think one of the things that's beginning to happen today is that we're looking at hybrid models of that allow us to explore different opportunities, just adding more arrows in the quiver of ways in which we could do this. And so in those kind of hybrid models, I think that Catapult has worked quite a bit within those, and I'd love to know a little bit about how those hybrid models look and what the benefits those have been to really your customer base.
Yeah, sure. So the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult, we're a technology innovation organization, and we look to generate impacts through collaboration and generate impactful collaborations with companies, technology providers, etc. So we look to do things in a slightly different way. And we've heard about the diversity in the sector. We all know that. We're seeing, tissue, regenerative sort of tissue medicines coming back now. Therapy is coming back through. So we can start to see an even broader diversity across the portfolio. So, we often look at things in a binary way. We used to have the auto versus allo, and then it's make versus buy. Well, there's a whole gray area that we're working with as in the technology space. So manufacturing is no different. So how do we enable within that area of gray, give different options to deliver those technology platforms through? And that's where we started back in, 2015, I think it was, when we started on this sort of hybrid model. It was effectively to come up with an alternative way to allow anyone, whether you're a CDMO or a developer of platforms or therapies, to access GMP capability quickly, so you can accelerate your programs, to get to the benefits of scale, because you're working as a sort of a collaborative in the non-competitive space. So as a collective collaboration, you're learning from each other about how to do things at scale, how to deploy, how to set up scalable platforms, all of which is then driving sort of innovation in these areas, which you can access as part of this sort of broader collaborations. But importantly, it's a segregated system that we've developed. So companies are working independently on their own processes, but the generic parts of supply chain, generic parts of GMP, etc., all of that sort of coming from the Catapult itself and that support envelope that we have around it, but it doesn't get near the more IP sensitive and knowledge transfer activities. And that's what we started out with, and it seems to have been fairly successful. We've had some great companies come in, some of them moving through now, companies like Autolus. I know Chris Van's here today, looking to now utilize all that knowledge that they have built up working in the Manufacturing Innovation Center in Stevenage, to now move into their new purpose-built manufacturing operation and taking all of that knowledge that they've aggregated and moving that forward. So I think that's a good example of how that supported infrastructure can help companies get forward quicker, because they haven't got to do everything from the base up. They can focus on perhaps what's important around their process and technology. And that's the sort of model that we've got, and we're now developing that a little bit further with another innovation centre that we have in the UK that we're just building through in Braintree, not far from Stevenage, where we'll be looking to expand on that slightly more and have more flexibility in the model, and how do we help people have a bit of a kickstart to get going from a support nature in terms of operational support, so they can build up their teams in parallel, keep the pace going while they're building their own facility or whatever, and then we can sort of retrench and allow those companies to then to move forward. So we're trying to evolve this hybrid model. I think it's got some benefits, clearly. CDMOs can use it as well. It's not exclusive. And CDMOs are also, looking at their model, and, it's not just a purity of their model. They're looking at different hybrid sort of situations within that CDMO structure as well, which is great, because I think that shows people are trying to be innovative, not just on the therapies themselves, but also how we deploy them.
Yeah, and I think, the fact that the CDMOs can access that as well, it really brings me to my next question for Tanya, is to talk a little bit about how you guys at Univercells have adapted to the changing environment and some of the things that changing the way in which you work and the way you operate. What things have worked well, what challenges you've faced in doing that?
So we work mainly, so we are, technology innovators from the equipment perspective. And working with CDMOs, it's really critical in the cell and gene therapy space, especially in the gene therapy space, because what we see is that companies that are working with CDMOs, they can really accelerate, as Steve mentioned, their development by already keeping the final scale that they want in mind, and really thinking and adopting technologies and strategies that are scalable by relying on the knowledge of the CDMO. We see some CDMOs offering, full range of support, ranging from cell line to the process, the equipment, even going as far as the plasmids. And this has really enabled our customers to accelerate their developments and also delay some of the critical decisions that they would have to make otherwise very early on investment. So they can delay those decisions until they have more visibility on the performance of their product or on their funding. And cash conservation, it's becoming a big topic in our field. So for us and for our customers, I think CDMOs have been quite instrumental there. There is a talk tomorrow by Hannah Lesh from Exothera. They'll talk a little bit more about these critical decisions, which I think could be very, very interesting. The other side of it is that companies that do want to go with the CDMO, they do have to think long term, because not all CDMOs will support you, throughout your journey. Some CDMOs would stop at phase 1, 2, others will go further. And if you're thinking about taking technology that is proprietary of your CDMO within your process, you really need to think about what are you going to do next, at what point are you ready to internalize, can you transfer some of that knowledge to another CDMO? So these are kind of the questions that we constantly discuss with our customers as well.
And I think that cash conservation piece is really interesting, especially as you try to get to the bottom of what you want to do, whether it's you build it yourself, go to a CDMO, look for a hybrid model. And so then, Scott, as you think about the customers and the clients that you work with, and what are some of those key factors in making those decisions?
Yeah, well, I think Stefan hit on it pretty well. It's not black and white, it's gray. There's not a right option for everybody. So what we need more of is, options that people can manufacture in different ways. So maybe that's you utilize a CDMO, you build your own facility, you utilize some kind of a hybrid model, something along those lines. And that's what we see with our customers, is that there isn't one format that fits everybody. And we try to adapt and push them in the right direction. The CDMOs are a great option to start out with. But to the points that Tanya made, you have to think long term about your strategy there. You have a lot of proprietary, either the cell line or the plasmids or the process that you're probably not going to be able to pick up and take somewhere else. And so you have to think through those early on. But it is a way to kickstart, to get going really quickly. Time is the biggest factor here for most companies versus money. So, but I think the more options that we have, the better that the field is going to be, and we're going to get more of those products through to the later phases.
Yeah, and I think talking, about the different companies and talking, ultimately, the way that we ensure that patients get the drugs that they need is that we support the companies that are developing those and moving those forward. And so it'd be great to understand from your perspective, Stephen, is how do you see that customer journey in terms of how they leverage technology and the use of the hybrid model in order to move those things more quickly?
That's interesting, yeah. So, it's been rather exciting. We've all got together today, worn ourselves out. And I think in good 50% of the discussions I've had today, sort of innovation where we should be focusing on innovation has been coming through as a sort of a theme. So it's, okay, standardization in terms of certain elements. Can we be having something here which allows companies to focus on what they want to be focusing on and putting some innovation into areas where that can be utilized? And I think that actually will give people more choices, and it won't be a barrier. It'll actually be a real enabler going forward. And it's just simple things such as the wet connectivity as well as the sort of data connectivity, the systems interconnectivity, things that we've been talking about for a while. But hopefully now that will start to come together a bit more as we're seeing some more perhaps collective activity in various areas. And so once you start to have the right circuit board, you've then got this more of a plug and play mentality that you can start to drop different components into. And then, as Scott said, you've got some areas which are very innovative. They're driving real complicated processes. And so to outsource something where that manufacturing complexity is so intrinsically embedded in that product, you think that's going to be hard. Now, that doesn't mean you can't go to a CDMO and utilize the massive knowledge base that they've got, but you're going to have to commit to that technology base one way or another, and you can make your own economic assessment. Some companies have, and investors have just a sort of a strategic decision not to do your own manufacturing anyway and use that outsource model. So it's not. There's no right or wrong answer. It's what's right for you as a business. Whereas some companies, the innovation is just in the G, for example. It's all around the target, and how they then deliver that is less important to them. So you can then see how that option would be very different to someone who's a very technology integrated, autologous therapy, for example, sort of next generation things. So I think first of all, you've got to sort of see what the advantage of doing your own manufacturing is, and is it an absolute necessity to do the manufacturing yourself rather than a nice to have because you want to do your own manufacturing. I think, and I think people are becoming more savvy on that now. It's not just we will do it because we want to have our control. It's actually being clear if there's any real benefit of doing that or not. And then that starts to get you onto that path of, okay, we will invest in technology here. We will invest in our own skill base and platforms rather than utilize someone else's because it's good enough. We know we can get to licensure with it. It's proven. And we want to put all the innovation in our discovery engine, for example. So you can see how things start to map out in various different ways. But I don't think we can get away from the fact that people need to have technology experts who can then deploy that technology and support that technology within your business. I don't think it can be just an arm's length. We give it to that CDMO, and that will churn it out. The CDMO community, I'm sure would like to chip in if they're here. Because they've got great knowledge, great flexibility of making things work. But the more you can get that partnership going, the better. The hybrid model, we've seen it work well. We work with companies to develop their technology process as well as then transfer and deploy it into that GMP space to other companies who have done that themselves or with other partners, and then we just allow or help them to establish themselves as a GMP operation rather than a tech transfer of the process as well. So again, different levels, but it has to be what's right for the project and the process, and actually making some conscious decisions around why you want to do your own manufacturing is what I sort of come back to, which you need to be doing up front as well as all the usual things on TPP and how you're going to, what's your reimbursement strategy, et cetera, and getting these things in very early in the technology evaluation that's going on in our marketplace now.
Yeah, I think and that technology piece is really interesting too, right? And I imagine that factors heavily into that decision of how you're going to, move forward with production of your therapeutic. And so, Tanya, as you see these emerging technologies, how do you think that applies to people making that decision on how they're going to move forward?
So I believe that technology selection will also have an impact on whether you're going to internalize manufacture or whether you're going to get to go to a CDMO as well. So setting up a facility, it's no easy task. So there are several components to take into account. There's not only capex, but there's also the timelines, the risks associated with it, the know-how. So it is a huge endeavor, and I think it's great that there are hybrid models like the one that Stephen just described from the catapult that can help companies actually internalize manufacture, but with support, so they don't have to worry as much about all of these components. Now, when we think about, for example, a gene therapy product, if you can imagine that instead of having to invest in a large-scale system, if you can have systems that have, or if the technology allows you to really decrease your manufacturing footprint, so having technologies that are not only smaller but also have higher productivities that can help you overcome one of the key issues, which is the capex barrier. But then you also have to think about other dimensions to it, but like speeds and risks and know-how. And I believe that technology innovation could be a way to tackle those challenges as well and those barriers as well. So I do think that it has a big place on the decision making between internalizing manufacture versus CDMO.
Yeah, and it's also, in my mind, also has implications on long-term your decision, right? So you may make a decision to go forward with a CDMO based off technology and then decide at some point that you're now going to shift and do manufacturing on your own. And so, Scott, what are some of the challenges that you see in that transition from a CDMO to doing it yourself, or vice versa for that matter?
Yeah, so I guess to tackle the first, you start out at a CDMO and you move to internal manufacturing. I mean, we discussed some of them a little bit ago. If your CDMO has a proprietary process or something in there, raw materials may be hard to get, specific equipment. You have to think about all of that. Can you actually tech transfer that process internally if you're going to manufacture the same product in two different places? I think once there's a platform, there's a strategy there that a lot of people, a lot of companies look at is maintaining a geographical separation of manufacturing. So they build an internal capability, but still maintain a manufacturing presence at the CDMO. And they may do that for new products coming in, manufacture them internally, but their lead product or their first couple lead products stay out in the CDMO. And again, the more flexibility that we have and the more options that we have, the easier it is, because there's not one size fits all for this.
Yeah, and the other thing that I kind of think about as I'm thinking about this too is that ultimately trying to get to a standard process that's stable. And I think that we've all talked about through the years about how do we get the manufacturing process potentially closer to the patients and actually start to distribute manufacturing versus product. And I think, one of the challenges that we've seen through that is getting that stable process that you feel comfortable taking out of your central manufacturing and distributing it out. So can you talk about some of those challenges that you see, Stephen?
I can try. I think there's a panel, I think this sort of time tomorrow, I know that there's a few, I know that I was just speaking to Ori Bio earlier, and I think Jason's on a panel tomorrow talking around where they are in terms of that sort of activity, in terms of more decentralized manufacturing with their systems. The way I've always looked at this is we're starting centralized. We have really open processing. It's starting to become a bit more enclosed. We still have open processing steps, but we're getting closer now from an autologous point of view. So that whole near-patient manufacture starts to become a bit more of a reality. I think it's becoming, very real possibility now. But it's the same principles. If you're going to do multiple batch processing in a large, a large ballroom, you still need to have automation, enclosure, traceability, etc. All the things that you need if you're going to put it in a decentralized, model. So I think we're moving great guns on the technology. I think there's a way to go on the control systems around distributed manufacturing. I think we're still relying on old thinking around testing. I know some companies are really pushing forward now on the sort of release by exception, and that's incredibly exciting because you need that, otherwise it doesn't, in my mind anyway, it struggles to work. The whole supply chain then starts to get behind it, and you can end up with more component-based manufacturing, manufacturing pods, common systems, quality systems, etc. You're starting to then see, how this could work closer to patients, to become more like a health provision, I suppose, rather than a classic, here's something, let's administer it, sort of activity. Whereas, allogeneic, it's by proxy, larger volume. If we need, to drive that near to the patient, it's more to utilize perhaps the material rather than make it. So still see the place for a more centralized production in the more allo or vector type of space, but because the cost efficiencies are clearly there.
Yeah.
But I do see some nice progress from my perspective in terms of near-patient manufacturing now, and I'm really excited about it. It seems to be becoming more tangible, because I've been quite resistant to it, been quite conservative, but I'm starting to get puffs because I'm getting old. I need something to cheer me up these days. I'm getting a grumpy old man. But yeah, it's good. It's getting closer.
And I'd actually love to have all of your perspectives on that. So, Tanya, do you have a perspective?
I do concur. I think that we are getting closer to it from a technology perspective, which is where I work. Back when I was doing my PhD, and it was exactly on this. So looking at the potential for decentralization of autologous cell therapies, one of the biggest enablers to do so was automation. So we needed technologies that were almost end-to-end automated. We talked about this concept of GMP in the box a lot at the time. This was referred to and kind of, very linked to at the time the Prodigy system, which was the first one to have multiple capabilities in a single platform. One of the biggest criticisms of doing that from a cost of goods perspective was that the systems were being used for the majority of the time as incubators because the cell culture process was quite long at the time. So you had all of these functionalities immobilized in a system that you could not really use all of them all the time, basically. But more recently, an example of how we're getting closer is that we start to see the duration of the processes reducing, which means that you now can turn around these technologies a lot faster, and you can really have more cost-effective processes for autologous products. imagine the next generation of integrated integrated and automated technologies for autologous processing, if you combine that with the correct software infrastructure to ensure all the traceability and control, and if you combine that as well with process improvements that makes the processes faster so that you can basically have more customers, more patients being served by the same equipment. I think that's the combination from a technology perspective that would really facilitate this decentralized manufacture of autologous products.
Terrific. And Scott?
I agree. No, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. I think, the autologous, we are closer to decentralizing. I agree with Tanya that it's going to be technology-based. That's really going to allow that to happen. I think just some things from my perspective that we would look at is, if you're going to that decentralized platform or format, how are you looking at consistency of product? Manufacturing needs to be the same raw materials, same process and things like that. So I think just to throw that in there, that's, I think, one reason why it needs to be your GMP in a box. It needs to be the same everywhere. But clearly we're moving in that direction. So.
And maybe just another question for the group, and we'll let Stephen start with an answer to that. But, I think it goes without saying that we still face some challenges with how we're going to manufacture the next generation of therapeutics. And so my question for everybody on the panel is, how do we work better together as an industry to start to tackle those challenges together?
Yeah. Well, what we learned over the last couple of years of awfulness that we've been sort of going through with the COVID-19 situation. Now, I can only talk to what I've been involved with, but the supply chain, and I agree with you, Scott. The supply chain has got a really important part to play in decentralization. So, supply chain, the developers, the testers, the regulators really got together and right, we've got a big problem here. How are we going to do things in a different way? And that has given me hope that people can come together and try to do things in a more non-competitive way, to see that there's a bigger value prize for everyone by working together. So I sort of mentioned that standardization sort of activity in terms of how do we get things to connect, give people better choice, for example. So, we do things at the Catapult. We're doing things with various industry bodies to try to create some critical mass. We're doing some work with a process analytical technology sort of collaboration that we've put together. There's 25, 30 companies, I think, involved with that. Again, to work in a sort of non-competitive way, to have non-invasive sensing to allow some of this decentralized manufacturing as well as centralized to be produced with more certainty. So I think things are changing now that the industry is clearly far more diverse. It's much bigger than it's ever been. I think people now realize that there are different ways of working. Ironically, because we were talking about hybrid at the start, I think there's a much bigger prize for us all coming together and working on this. And yeah, we try to do things ourselves in certain areas where we believe that collective approach can make a difference.
Yeah.
And so then, Tanya, same question to you, but from a technology perspective.
Yeah, it's the same. It's all based on collaborations. I think that where we're going to have the best, the best impact is by having collaborations not only with other technology providers, but also with our target customers, because they understand the products, the market, the needs. So in order for us to really provide something that can ultimately accelerate the development and commercializations of these products, we need to listen to those who are manufacturing them and have the full understanding of the market and the constraints. On the technology side is also very important. We specialize in bioreactors and integrated solutions. But for example, we are not specialists in sensing technologies. So for us, it would just be, taking time and expertise that today we don't have to try and keep all the pie for ourselves, rather than having an expert technology company that can help us deliver the best system for our customers. So having these both technology partnerships as well as having partnerships with end users, I believe that there is the best way to develop the best systems.
Fantastic. And then Scott?
I think people. I think that, some of us have been in the field quite a while. But we have a younger generation coming up. We're going to have to mentor them and get them familiar with the processes. I think we're going to solve all these things. It's taken us this long to get to this point. It's going to take us a little bit longer to get to the next step. But we're going to have to mentor those people coming through, and then to also look to other industries. We've looked to monoclonal antibodies and some proteins for some of the scale-up manufacturing and things like that. But are there other industries that we can take pieces from and learn that way? So,
Terrific. Well, thanks everyone for your time. Thank you for your time. I'm sure any of us would happily have a discussion sidebar at any point in time during the day. And at this point, I think I can send everybody off to a glass of wine or a beer.
That'd be good.
Thank you.